To all those who are watching, welcome to our webinar. Our session today will be on nurturing ethics in governance, taming our rascals within. And our presenter today is Dr. Peter Appadale. Dr. Peter is a professor at the University of Alberta. He has researched, lived, taught, and collaborated as an economist and agriologist in many countries. He is passionate about governance, agriculture, and rural sustainability. Dr. Appadale has also turned his attention to a philosophical inquiry into the meaning of ethics and nurturing ethical behavior in governance. He is the author of the recently published book, Nurturing Ethics in Governance, Taming Our Rascals Within, which can also be found on Amazon. I am now going to pass it on to our presenter, Dr. Peter, and you can take it away.
Thanks a lot, Munzaline. Good day to everybody. A small correction, I'm a Prof Emeritus from the U of A. I'm not actually a prof, so I've lost any kind of authority that I ever might have had as a prof. I'm going to be reading this. I don't usually read presentations, but I've lost my confidence to be extemporaneous, so I'm going to read this. I ask your forbearance. The main thing that I want you to get out of this today is something that I call the joy of ethics. So this little essay is really a teaser, if you like. Hopefully it'll prompt some questioning about your own ethics and questioning about how you can raise the bar for ethics in the communities where you live, and of course, where we all live in communities. We need to be thinking about how to raise the bar. We're all ethical, of course, but we can all do better. My colleague on this project was Josh Bowman, an artist in Berlin, Germany, and the illustrations which you'll see are his. The roadmap for today starts with two or three introduction pieces, and then we'll go on to talk about how we construct community ethics and the emphasis on building a mentoring program. And we'll end with finding our ethics substance, some thoughts on how we can develop our substance, which is the beginning of upping the bar, raising the bar in what we do. We denizens need ethics nurture so far from universal truths. We, the planet's denizens, mocking our harmonies, fracturing our identities, trampling our alpine meadows. That's just a little bit of poetry to set the mood here. This essay opens an uncomfortable subject. Just broaching the subject of ethics smells of an accusation. It incites defensiveness. Not a good place to start a conversation. Having a policy in place goes a long way to respect people's comfort zones. When does our persuasive rhetoric cross the ethics line into sophistry? When and how much deception are unacceptable in consultative processes? In achieving our goals, in kidding ourselves? Do we know the difference between deliberate and inadvertent deception? Do we understand when networking morphs into cronyism and how to pull back? Does policy advice sometimes entail dissembling? When does prevarication go too far? What is just sneaky and laudably artful, and what is sneaky and unethical? Where is the tipping point within our policy strategy into intimidation to secure a policy truth? How do we recognize and set limits on intimidation? When does silence, known as an Apollo silence, disturb an inner truth harmony or interfere in a search for policy solutions? What is the difference between sovereign consent and manufactured policy consent? My research of the past 10 years into our Greco-Roman philosophical roots has led me to understand that most of us do not understand ethics. Our first instinct is to confuse ethics with morality. The essence in ethics is the application of virtue and duty to the exercise of and resistance to power in relationships among the diverse sovereign wills that define each individual person. Virtue and duty are learned, guided by a given moral compass. Thus, ethics self-define individual and organizational character. Ethics are owned by us, not by Moses and his peers. We are accountable for our ethics. Absence of ethics feeds a culture of impunity. My intent today is to advance the larger purpose of advocating for higher ethics standards in public service, especially municipal and volunteer. All public policy involves reconciliations of competing wills and truths. Ensuing policies define our governance. Individually, we also face competing inner wills and willfulness. Among our not-so-nice rascally side, our indulgent side, and our public policy responsibilities. Everyone believes in and would vigorously defend their identity as ethical beings. The institutions we work within are ethical. It is others that are unethical, n'est-ce pas? Especially elected political leaders. Yet we are all tempted when faced with ethics dilemmas. When we don't recognize a dilemma or can't resist a temptation or self-indulgence, we make ethics mistakes. Ethics do not confer immunity to temptation. Ethics can protect us, however, from falling to temptation. But like any other piece of infrastructure, they require investment, nurture. We can reduce the severity and frequency of our falls. Josh Bowman, who hatched our birds, goes further. He makes the point that many of us may live an inconsistency in our ethics, even as we judge others. He suggests that our lapses may seem somewhere between a foregone conclusion or something inevitable, but not that serious. A commitment to ethics standards can seem futile as we fudge our way through our ethical duty, betraying our virtue. But lapses are not irreversible. Nurture enables us to face an inconsistent track record by making a commitment with the others we live and work with to invest in steadfast ethics standards. We do not need to continue breaching ethics standards, even by mistake, simply because we have lived inconsistently in the past. Ethics are learnable. Now, what would this policy look like? A code of ethics is not by itself an ethics policy. Policy requires mentoring, self-audits, external audits, and ways to handle slip sliding away. Budgeted resources are essential for enrichment, education, and training of mentors, retreats, and audits. As for all policy, ethics policy needs to be codified. One good place for enshrining the ethics policy is in a procedural bylaw, in itself a best practice at the core of self-governance. The prime element for an ethics policy, whether personal or organizational, is a long-term mentoring program. This works best when the policy-making organization recruits and accepts volunteer mentors. As learning takes place, it is shared with others, emerging in a common understanding of the substance of ethics. 4 steps are introduced below as a framework to grow the ethics infrastructure. An ethics policy usefully includes capacity to conduct self-audits, as ethics dilemmas are resolved and temptations are revealed as a consequence of mentoring. Self-audits nurture the instinct to come down on the correct ethical outcome in policy choice. Provision for external audits widens the scope for learning from others' standards and experiences. Others who also try to raise the bar and subject themselves to ever more robust ethics. External audits must never take on the aura of evaluation or supervision. Rather, they should be strongly rooted in peer relationships, linking policy making in the community, a part of consultation-style governance, reaching out to related associations such as an association of rural municipalities. At some point, a policy may come up against stubborn recalcitrants. It is useful to agree on methods for addressing recalcitrant conduct and the persistent inability to live up to agreed standards. Robust ethics mean two things: recognition and avoidance of red lines, and a non-punitive, preferably peer approach to protecting trust in leaders of the public interest. Let's go on and talk a little bit about ethics policy from the perspective of governing willfulness. And I love this drawing that Josh came up with, because I've seen so many meetings look like this. To nurture ethics is perhaps the most profound policy choice we make. Without ethics, power is wielded, defended, and resisted to corrupt the rationality of all other policy choices. Corruption of ethics corrupts our thinking and leads to corrupt conduct, some of which has been criminalized, most not. Just because some corrupt conduct has been criminalized does not make it policeable or prosecutable through the courts. A committed policy to nurture ethics is a policy to tame the willfulness and self-interest in the name of rational outcomes. Very Kantian. Simply stated, policy is a deliberate set of principles and procedures to guide rational decisions. Ethics policy is relationships, how we configure and wield power in relationships, how we sustain satisfying policy outcomes around our interests, with and in spite of our community champions, especially when they and we bring our roguish rascals to the policy table, and how we construct robust ethics standards with willing accountability. In short, how we nurture intentional ethics. At their core, ethics are a living truth harmony among thought, word, and deed. Harmony is achieved by fulfilling the duty to search for truth, and once having found it, articulating, that's honesty, and acting upon it, that's integrity. Of course, truth is an unfolding knowledge, both intellectual and observational. The research should be subject to Descartes' notion of healthy skepticism. Every rational, ethical governing policy is based on a bundle of received truths, based on informed consent. Ethics tests may be applied for duty, virtue, and consequences, especially in the context of policy impact on sovereign wills to care. The ways of handling the contest of wills fall in four categories: force, guile, morals, and discourse. I contend that ethical conduct underlying policy development involves a truth discourse that by its very nature is only governable by ethics standards firmly anchored in the community. Resort to force, including manufactured anxiety and guile, is evidence of failed ethics in the political dimension of governing diverse perspectives on policy. The temptations in this discourse challenge all of us in the form of ethics dilemmas. Unpoliceable. The enduring policy challenge, then, is to maintain governability of ourselves, peoples, and situations. Policy initiatives from whatever source raise concern as challenges to interests become known or imagined. Policy balances and our many forms of power are disturbed, to be restructured and morphed through inequalities into new, usually unpredictable forms, especially among members of governing elites. Guile is so instinctive in the relationship between infrastructure policy, commerce, and property development. That is to say, fiscal incentives, public capital allocation, services, and the regulatory environment. Dependency of private fortune on public money and policy. Though not in my area of expertise, I've become convinced that, especially when I was a municipal councillor and reeve in my municipality, that dependency of all kinds somehow incites people to move out of their ethics space across boundaries into immorality, criminality, or violation of constitutional rights. Think of political warlordism and rural crime, perhaps as a way to counter a powerlessness so emblematic of damaged wills. I've observed that rural dependency encourages cynicism, sneakiness, prevarication, or cunning in workarounds to counter, yet perpetuate a pastoral bureaucracy. Pastoral power inherent in policy dependency is, in my view, the greatest ethics challenge for rural policy. As the economic rationale for rural investment continues to weaken, pastoral care remains the go-to policy for rural places, regions, and peoples. The first is the mercantile kind, referred to above, to sweeten rate of return and profits and reduce risk and uncertainty. The rural task base is held down and kept narrow as a form of mercantile support for self-enclaving resource extraction, like agriculture, forestry, mining, and fishing. At the same time, demand-side drivers for the service sector, characterized by small, medium-sized enterprises, hold back growth. In fact, based on our SURF-sponsored Canada-Japan research a few years ago, medium-sized by global standards almost doesn't exist in rural Canada. The second kind is education, health, and social services. First from missions, then churches, this is over time history, now volunteer associations and the state. Fiscal and service dependency is pretty well the main policy outcome, whether for First Nation or settler rural economy. Ethics policy in the rural context is perhaps the only policy able to govern pastoral power and the powerlessness it encounters and engenders. Yet most rural communities, and of course countries, do have champions. Everyone wants these champions to succeed. We, the many associations of interests that constitute our community, coddle, arm wrestle, and cajole champions as they and we respond to Plato's simple trio of motivations: gain, honor, victory, and wisdom. We construct rational policy arguments for investment, employment creation, and social vibrancy. This is the essence of Bruno Jean's and Mario Carrier's concertation approach of governance, interpreted in English, but unfortunately trivialized as multi-level and collaborative. But does a champion remain a champion under any and all conducts in its response to and influence on public policy? Is a local rural manufacturing firm a champion when, with favorable taxpayer-funded support, it fudges labor standards encroaches on environmental easements, ignores commitments to site remediation, and houses foreign workers in rundown housing? How about suborning municipal officials and vice versa? Put quite bluntly, can a champion still be considered a champion, or an elected official a leader, when their conduct fails community ethics standards? From the community and citizens' perspective, think also about lost public confidence in elected officials, in trustworthiness, in governability. These consequences are not unanticipated. They are why the rate of return on investment in ethics nurture is so high. Clearly, we need to keep ethics top of mind, place the ethics conversation on top of the table, open, comfortable, nurturing, taking care of our ethics together, judging ourselves, not others, making ethics part of our governing culture, governing ourselves and our disparate dynamical powers in relationships. The second and last part of this essay addresses the substance of ethics, the first of 4 steps to nurture. These 4 steps are summarized in the accompanying images of birds nurturing one of their environment's trees. The steps are developed by the prominent French philosopher Michel Foucault and illustrated by Josh Bowman. Ethics, a work in progress, starting with the household. Mentoring is the cornerstone. A policy of, I really need to go back there, but I've jumped ahead. Mentoring is the cornerstone. A policy to raise and willingly submit to community ethics standards begins with mentoring. Individual consciousness of truth disharmonies in one's relationship with oneself. The next place to nurture community ethics is around the kitchen table with household members, or indeed within any relationship with a special person, or using a retreat format for a board or elected council. A basic code of ethics is useful as a learning device and a reference point for articulating progress in understanding the substance of ethics. A code that memorializes growth in ethics nurture to help tempted individuals subject themselves to its standards is more powerful at raising standards than as a prosecutorial instrument. It is helpful to consider 4 steps, not necessarily sequential, but rather using a comfortable iterative rotation through the steps. Excuse me. Gradually, substance of ethics is shared and coalesced into standards for that community of relationships. As standards are firmed up, so is the commitment to abide by them, setting them as explicit expectations for conduct, evidence to others. Now, this slide that's up here is illustrating step 1, the first of Foucault's 4 steps. It addresses behavior relevant to ethical judgment. Ethics substance is rooted in feelings and intentions. This step is about setting personal and corporate standards and learning from wider discussions about the substance of ethics and standards that others are learning. This step is expanded upon shortly. Step 2 is to invite commitment to ethics. The second step is to encourage and invite ourselves to acknowledge and be subject to the substance we have identified for ethics in our relationships. By internalizing our truths about ethics substance, we subject our wills to standards of conduct as an obligation, gaining thereby peace of mind from relational anxiety. The third step identifies the means for moving behavior closer to meeting the substance of our ethics standards determined in step 1 and putting these into practice. The third step gets all Foucault's technology of the self to work, shaping what we do and how we use our power and meet the power of others. It is proactive, self-forming learning to improve conduct as business is transacted. Volunteer activity takes place and public policy is deliberated, and as an end result, public services are delivered. The fourth step is to become intentional. Intentionality defines what we want to become and be known by others to be, or what our organization aspires to be when its members behave ethically. Whatever the goal, being profitable, reducing crime, being self-reliant, leaving a legacy, being morally pure, or excelling in public service, among many other goals, it is thereby raised into an ethical context, giving enduring intention meaning to the effort needed for the first three steps. Finding our ethics substance is the first step, and that is the one I want to concentrate on for a few minutes. At the core of ethics lie truth harmonies. Once again, for emphasis, these harmonies are a seamless congruity of thought, word, and action, each embodying its own truth. However, truth is also a game, where the appearance of harmony is in constant tension with true harmony. So it's not easy to be ethical, especially when strategic and tactical norms invite self-deception and guile, and discourse encounters extreme willfulness, instinctively applying both direct and indirect force, such as fear. The point is, everybody knows or understands or appreciates or recognizes or interprets their truth differently. It is in permanent tension with, quote unquote, the real truth, and for many reasons, not the least of which is the fallibility of our senses, leading to self-deception. Thus, the appearance of truth may be both true and false, the truth paradox. That is why an open willingness to search for truth through discourse and reason is fundamental to ethical conduct, to align sovereign wills, not break them. Let us pause for a moment to think about the search for truth. Consider this fine quotation from de Montaigne's essay written in 1580 of the art of conversing. Quote, "I hail and welcome the truth. In whatever hand I find it, I cheerfully surrender and tend my vanquished sword to her as soon as I see her approach in the distance." Unquote. The substance in this quotation is that an ethics policy requires us to search willingly for truth about every choice, and once finding it, to bring ourselves and our policies into harmony with it. Now, many searches are never ending, such as the search for a sweet spot, where public opinion intersects with public interest and a general will. Informed consent on something like climate change. Public policy can't wait for these truths to become uncertainties in all minds. The medieval tension between dogma and science persists today within the search for policy truth. Now, luckily, at every point in the search, a consensus awaits based on whatever expertise, scientific or political, say, on evidence, and waits to attach to trade-offs. The will to knowledge underlines this ethic precept. Once this kind of truth establishes itself, ethics require courage and action in the form of policy. As updates to knowledge, both knowing and understanding kinds of knowledge occur, driven by the will to know and therefore the will to search. Actions may be updated through policy revisions. Indulging in deception, illusion, or withholding knowledge in the search for truth to exert power over another individual's or organization's truth or a voter's truth has its ethical limits, our own kitchen table limits. However, these have been nurtured. Normally, these limits are well centered within a space bounded by morality, criminality, and constitutional rights. When these boundaries appear to be or are constructed to be so constraining as to eliminate this ethics space, or our conduct bumps up against one of the boundaries, those limits become the de facto substance of ethics. When that happens, we hear the familiar, "Isn't that conduct unethical?" "Heck no, it's not illegal or immoral or doesn't violate any constitutional right." These answers do not address the ethics question posed in the first place. When people see no space for ethics, only boundaries, they have not found or understood the substance of their ethics. All they see is an enforcement problem. In a pure sense, no deception or exploitation of power should be accepted in any relationship. The difference between breaking and aligning wills. Public policy requires devotion to the search for truth, and once having settled on it, articulating and acting upon it. By working through these features of ethical substance, an organization, such as a municipal government, begins to understand what its members, i.e. citizens, want it to be, with its board consenting to be subject to standards that move it ever closer to attaining intentional ethics, thereby firming up the demand side of ethics. Unlike financial investment, investing in ethics is risk-free. Beneficial outcomes are absolutely certain. And now I do look forward to questions. I hope I've left enough time for some serious questions.
Alrighty, thank you, Peter, for sharing this information with us. It was very interesting. For those in the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we do have a couple questions here. So our first question is from Ray Bowman. He says hi to you, and do you have an example or case study of a good ethics situation?
Hello, Ray. An example of a good ethics situation. I think you are revealing one of the difficulties that we have in governance, and that is cynicism and distrust. And of course, ethics, a higher ethics bar should go to work and help you a great deal. But I know that your ethics bar is already quite good, so I'm not worried about that part. I think most people involved in public policy are, despite struggling with their ethics, Ray, they are ethical and producing good ethical results. I think there are three tests which are helpful here. One is, has duty been fulfilled? And I think most of the people I know who work on public policy are very dutiful. They're very mindful of of the duty they have as especially policy researchers. That means that in the research and in the search for truth leading up to a policy recommendation, they're very concerned that they don't apply force in their relationship, consultative relationships, in their sampling and their data collection and so on. I think that's a good, very good example. Now, on virtue, it's a bit harder to comment on, but in my experience, it really depends how we individually struggle with the notion of virtue. I was reading Solzhenitsyn's November 1916, and there are a couple of soldiers on the front line with the Germans are having this discussion in between shellings about whether virtue can be inculcated. They also were being cynical, like the back end of that question you asked, but they did conclude that it can be taught. And certainly, I think Plato would suggest that that begins at a very early age by a sort of a governance feature of parenting, as opposed to an instructional feature of parenting. And I think there's plenty of evidence of that kind of inculcation of virtue is working. On consequences, I'm less sure that we're achieving very well because of the unintended consequences of our public policies. Very, very hard to anticipate everything that's going to happen as a result of promulgating a policy. And that comes back to the issue of cunning and workarounds. Policies are very often incentive for regulatory types of policy, and there's a strong incentive in those kinds of policies to do workarounds. It's really requires a rather larger than normal bottle of Alberta Springs to really do justice to your excellent question, Ray.
Thank you. We have another question from Sarah Breen. Her question is, if a manager wanted to encourage personal development of ethics amongst their staff, what would you suggest?
I would suggest that the staff be convened to talk about what the substance is of their ethics. And one of the ways would be to look at some of the detail, of course, in the book, but I think they use some of the questions that I raised right at the outset in this presentation. They are very excellent for starting a conversation. And then as the people work through them, they can start to codify their consensus on where the line is between sneaky and unethical, which is one of the most common things. Or networking is so important. Have a conversation about when networking ends up being clientelism and cronyism. Having conversations about when they're receiving what they feel is uncomfortable influence from stakeholders arrayed around the policy questions that they're working on. A very practical start is that every time you have a staff meeting is to just spend 2 or 3 minutes reading out or looking at an ethics precept, just to remind people. Formerly, we used to, and some people still do, have Bible readings at the beginning of meetings. Well, I think it's a very good, useful idea to talk about to have somebody, perhaps in rotation, reading out an ethics precept. I know Rotary Club meetings do this. A member is assigned, a rotational member has to come up with a small saying or some research that they did. Just take 2 or 3 minutes to remind the meeting about ethics.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lloyd, and Lloyd's question is, can ethics be codified or should they be?
The substance of ethics that emerges from the kind of process I was just outlining should be, I would say, memorialized. Now, memorialized is a fancy big word and has certain connotations that I find a bit uncomfortable, but codified also has some connotations I find uncomfortable, because the idea about codification is it sort of implies a down the road compliance measures. So the easy answer is yes. We'll go on to the next question. But the better answer is that it's very important to record progress that your group makes as its ethics become more robust, to discuss some of the issues that arise when it's difficult to subject oneself or subject the organization to standards of ethics that it has agreed on or the individuals have agreed on. And also to have discussions around dilemmas that are coming up and are troublesome, in the sense that an individual is facing, say, some unfortunate pressure from, as an example before, from a stakeholder, and how to deal with the ethics that are implied there. And of course, you have the conflict always between self-interest and self-indulgence. Like, do you really work on this, or do you just go home and take it easy? It's very easy to indulge your own slackness, and that's something that's a very nice topic for a group to talk about, how they overcome that, to really be diligent in their search for truth for the policy they're working on.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, and that's from Bill. He says, I am regularly challenged by the implication that ethical standards are relatively set and shared. My experience is of a constant wrestling with the complexity of changing standards. What types of venues would facilitate this rather than focusing on meeting some relatively clear bar?
Well, I think the first venue is, if it's the same Bill that I know, one of the first venues is when you're in the shower, or when you're out on a run with somebody, or just on your own, and as the steps go forward, you just free up your mind. So that's starting yourself to and I think you've done that. Then I think it's very useful to raise these questions around the dinner table, especially with your kids. But since life doesn't end when your kids move away, it's very useful to have this discussion with other people that may be happening, maybe around your dinner table. But having said that, the venue is yourself. But if you're talking about say a policy unit, I worked in a planning and policy unit in Africa once. If that's the kind of organization you are involved with, or a municipal council, or the board of directors of victim services unit, working with the police, now there is a very fascinating thing to be involved with. Then the venue has to be those meeting tables. And as I said a moment ago, raising an ethics point at the beginning by agreement is a very good way to anchor the thinking of people on the ethics of their deliberations. Now that's venue part. It is complex, and our standards are evolving. The reason that they're evolving is that humans have this insatiable will for knowledge. And as our knowledge changes, inevitably, because the search for knowledge is so driven and so ongoing. It's so fed by different things like science and think tanks and so on. Then our standards also change. There's a very good article by Johnson in the second latest Economist about changing pejorative expressions to describe people. And that is an evolution of society's preoccupations, I think, on the moral side. What we have to learn for ethics is how we manage our relationships as the moral compass is shifting. So I think your question is really about shifting moral compass as some societies become more secular and less sectarian. And I think right now that's one of the big struggles in the longer evolution of societies. But once again, and you're not a whiskey drinker, it's really too bad, but you could really learn a lot more if we had a social conversation together, which is a really excellent venue for this type of exploration.
Oh, from Ray Bowman. He's saying, risk-free, please convince me.
Say that again.
His question, he just says risk-free, and then please convince me.
Oh, well, I'll convince you, because most investments carry a lot of risk with them. That's one of the reasons we're not seeing rural areas blossoming economically with high growth rate. But ethics investment is risk-free, because more robust ethics standards always result in better expressions of the truth underlying policy, even though the search for truth is an open-ended one because of the will to know the fact that we're never quite there. As knowledge changes, then in reality, truths become better understood. If you don't invest in your ethics, then you will slow down or bias or distort the search for truth and come up with policies that are absolutely senseless. I think we have seen quite a lot of that in the last 40 days.
Thank you, Dr. Peter.
You've read this book. This is not just a shameless promotion of the book. Some of you have read it, and those of you that read it asked really tough questions. I think people would have fun with this book, especially after seeing Josh's birds. His illustrations are amazing, and the way he's pulled out the captions, quite constantly amusing me.
Okay, so I believe these are all our questions. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Peter?
I think I just added already too much.
Okay, so we just got one more question here from Bill. His question is, do you have examples of moving to such discussions under conditions of conflict?
I don't. Under conditions of conflict, you've already got power games going, and very difficult. That's when a mentor would be very useful. If people agree that the conflict is not really sustainable situation, then in the advocacy that we're talking about here, that's the time when a mentor can be very useful to bring people back a step from that. Now, one of the things that I think is very useful is to get everybody to a fine dinner and relax everybody, and then maybe at that follow up with some mentor discussion about how to avoid getting into conflict situations over truths. That has worked well. I've seen that work well. So a social event around a good meal in a restaurant, maybe a private room, breaks down all this stuff quite a bit. but there has to be a follow-up. In some of the experience that I've had, there was not a follow-up, and the goodwill and agreement to do things in a more ethical way, especially in the ethics of collegiality, or the ethics of working together as a council or board of directors. You need to have follow-up.
Okay, I would like to once again thank you, Peter, for your great presentation. I would also like to thank the audience for attending this webinar and for their participation. Any last minute things to add, Dr. Peter? Or?
No, I'm so grateful that some people that I know have joined this webinar. It's very gratifying. Thank you all for being there today. It feels very good to know that we've been having this conversation. We live in different parts of the country. Thanks again. My whole intellectual life, a great deal of my intellectual life was with you guys and people. And yeah, thank you.
Alrighty, thank you everybody for participating, and have a great rest of the day.